damn fine cup of coffee.
Good morning, and welcome on in to your Sunrise Book Club. This morning, we continue our journey with American Cosmic, UFOs, religion, and technology. This chapter is called The Human Receiver: Matter, Information, Energy, Contact. It's been a wild journey so far, a journey of the history of belief, a journey of learning about just how manipulated the media is around the phenomena or UFOs, how what we watch buries itself into our subconscious, so then when we have a weird experience, we put what we know onto it. So we might not even be experiencing what we think we're experiencing. But also, we've been taken to a UFO crash site outside of Roswell, one of the crashes that happened in 1947. We've found a piece of a UFO. We've also met top-level scientists, top of their game, who work at NASA and some of the top research universities in America and the world, who claim to be in contact with off-world intelligences that help them with their experiments, or they're either beamed ideas or they're able to remember things, as one of them put it. Tonight, our chapter is called The Human Receiver. And in our last chapter, we learned about how DNA, or at least it's theorized how DNA, yes, it's definitely a secret of the log, how DNA is like a satellite or like a receiver, right? So now we're going to kind of learn what that all means, hopefully. Every chapter starts with a quote. This one's from Susan Demeter St. Clair. All family members present were willing to discuss what happened with me. All acknowledged hearing an external voice urging them to look at the UFO, and all of them felt in some way profoundly affected by the UFO encounter. This is one example from dozens of cases which I have personally investigated in the Canadian province of Ontario that demonstrates to a certain degree of what is known in UFO studies as high strangeness. Ooh! And let's hope that this is a chapter of high strangeness. That's the best kind of shit. So that's Susan Demeter St. Clair. While driving home from my parents' home, I spoke to God for the first time. I looked up at the stars and said to both God and the entities with which I was interacting, I congratulate you. You have managed to completely transform a total atheist into someone who now believes in God, the spirit world, and life after death, more than any Catholic priest in Miami. They thus spoke Ray Hernandez while driving his car one day. What had happened to Ray? Let's find out. A UFO sighting or event often has the effect of completely changing the direction of one's life, much like a religious conversion experience. This was the case with Ray, a lawyer and self-described rationalist and atheist. After a series of sightings and related paranormal experiences, Ray, together with Apollo astronaut Dr. Edward Mitchell, Harvard astrophysicist Dr. Rudy Schild, and Australian researcher Mary Rodwell, co-founded the Dr. Edward Mitchell Foundation for research into extraterrestrial encounters, or FREE. It is the first global multilingual study of people who claim to have UFO-related contact with non-human intelligence, sick, and related paranormal experiences. Ray reminded me that when I refer to his work, I should mention that he is just one of many qualified researchers who have put in hundreds, even thousands of hours in support of the organization. Free sounds like a more modern and legit MUFON. I love MUFON, not saying it's not. MUFON is largely civilian, and it's like pay to play. You pay to take their training course. This seems like an organization where you're a part of if you have like a PhD and you're a researcher. And I love that they're working with contactees. This is what we need, folks. Something's happening out there to people. And again, I love a story of a skeptic going to the other side, because I feel like I lived that in my experience, going from a young man who believed to a still a young man who completely didn't believe, and now to a man who is a complete believer in most things. As Jacques Vallée discovered, there are two types of UFO reports. There are those that are reported to authorities and those that are revealed to sympathetic listeners, who are sometimes also authorities. The fear of ridicule keeps many UFO testimonies subterranean, submerged within subcultures that nevertheless grow each year. This chapter explores the experience of Ray Hernandez, his wife Dulce, and documents the unexpected twists and turns it took once he publicized it. Going back to what Vallée talks about here with people reporting only the high strangeness to sympathetic people, people who will understand them and not ridicule them. That's like with Betty and Barney Hill. To the Air Force, they reported just seeing lights. However, to their therapist and Donald Kehoe, they reported the alien experience, people they trusted. And their therapist, mind you, was a skeptic. They weren't digging for UFO shit, and then Betty and Barney were like, oh. Betty and Barney told them. And then they were like, oh. The Hernandez's experiences are instructive for several reasons. First, each saw something extraordinary, yet they interpreted it differently. Dulce is a devout Catholic and interpreted her experience as divine and within the framework of Catholic theology. Ray, who was an atheist prior to his experience, is still interpreting it. In his work, Ray delves into the testimonies of UFO contact in its secular form. Testimony is a form of evidence. To give testimony in a court of law is to provide information that is supposed to be true and to correspond with real life matters. If one provides false testimony, it is called perjury. Within the history of religions, testimony is also a type of evidence. Many religious traditions are built upon the testimonies of believers. Believers report extraordinary things and events, such as miracles or sightings of supernatural beings. This testimony is often accompanied by information about the credentials of those who testify. In both religious cultures and UFO cultures, the quote-unquote credible witnesses or credible witness is an important feature that helps lend credibility, if not to the actual reality of the extraordinary claims, at least to the fact that credible people experience extraordinary events. Talking about Dulce and Ray, that harkens back to the previous chapter as well, where they're both interpreting things differently. Their subconsciousnesses are like putting meaning on it, or even changing the visuals for them so they understand that they understand what they're seeing. You know, I just think that's so cool. It reminds me of the alien abduction I love to talk about that allegedly happened outside of Area 51. Man and his female companion are out there checking out the lights in the sky on one of the mountaintops that you can access. I don't know if maybe it might have been, or it was the 70s, so they might have been a little closer because they've expanded the no-go zone. Anywho, they're watching the sky and they see these lights up there. Pew, pew, pew. And they see one of the lights transform. They see it transform into a car. And this has been reported before. The UFOs transforming, the lights transforming. And then next thing they know, they've lost about 45 minutes of time. They don't know what happened. They're trying to figure out. They're talking. They decide to go do a little regressive therapy. They both go under. What they remember is two different things. The lady remembers being taken into a van where military dudes threatened her and injected her with something, then told her to never talk about this. While the dude remembers being taken aboard a UFO and having a classic Pokia Praja Examina gray alien abduction encounter. It sounds like what we're learning about in here. They encountered something. Their conscious, the subconscious, whatever it was, appeared to them as different things. But they still encountered it. They still had that encounter. I just love that. Oh, I don't know. I love that stuff. It's like something's happening. I don't think anyone knows what the fuck it is, though. Yeah, yes, Rogan's fire. You see things in the terms of what you believe. That's how that's how it all works. And then we're learning in this book, or at least I'm learning, how susceptible we all are to things like propaganda and the things that we watch. How they bury themselves deep inside of our heads, and even just a movie you watch and you know it's fake, something gets in, and then that kind of shifts your reality to a different belief, and you don't even know that it got in there. Many of the scientist believers I interviewed think that the phenomena functions like a technology, and that the human is a receiver and transmitter of information. Ray and his cadre of colleagues, 12 retired physicists, neuroscientists, psychologists, and scientists, employ various methods, including quantum physics, to explain the relationship between consciousness and contact with non-human intelligence. For them, this interaction defies a dualist construction of spirit and matter and bridges the rift between two camps of researchers in ufology. The nuts and bolts materialists, so that's like people who think the crafts are just material, extraterrestrials flying in the sky. And then the subjectivists, those who focus on the testimonies of experiencers. Shouldn't we just be doing both? I'm sure that's what these people are doing. According to Ray, the scientists associated with Free are working on theories that will provide an explanation on how these experiences are both physical and subjective. This new holographic theory challenges us to deconstruct the artificial wall of separation erected between events that occur only in consciousness and those that can manifest on a physical scale. The key is the code, and Edgar explains how this is so. It was very early on a Sunday morning in March 2012. Ray and Dulce's beloved Nina, a Jack Russell Terrier, who had been a member of their family for 16 years, had become paralyzed the night before. Ray had contacted a veterinarian friend who said that Nina had most probably suffered a cerebral hemorrhage. The friend offered to open his office to the following day, Sunday, to euthanize Nina. Deeply saddened, Dulce turned to her faith. She prayed to God that he would send his angels to cure Nina. That morning, her prayers were answered in a way that would shatter Ray's atheism and confirm Dulce's faith. Oh my God, fuck yes. Nina! Ray, in an interview, relates the first of a series of extraordinary experiences in Figure 6.1 is a depiction of what Ray saw. Ray's wife saw something like Figure 6.2. So here we go. We're going to dive into an actual fucking experience. Way more documented than the Area 51 abduction case I talk about. Let's party. Oh my God, Nina. My wife woke up and checked on the dog to see if she had regained her mobility. Our pet was not able to move at all except for just from the neck up. My wife then carried her down the stairs. And when she got down there, she saw an object that was floating 4 feet off of the ground, 1 foot away from the wall. And it was like metallic in shape, approximately like an upside down U. It had these 2 ring lights in the center. My wife, being the good hardcore Catholic from Mexico that she is, knelt down and started praying, basically saying, if you're a bad spirit, leave. But if you're a good spirit or an angel or the Virgin Mary, stay. Mexicans always see the Virgin Mary everywhere, Ray laughs. And she said, please stay and don't let my dog suffer, my poor Nina. Nina is her name. Then all of a sudden, these green lights started blinking and started flashing on her, like scanning her. At that point, she freaked out and she started yelling for me. She started screaming my name. It was 6 a.m. and I thought she had seen a cockroach or a little mouse on the floor. Ray laughs. I totally ignored her. After 10 or 15 minutes of screaming for me to come downstairs, she went upstairs and literally hauled me out of bed. When I got downstairs, what I saw was not the object that she had seen. What I saw was, I guess you'd describe as a plasma object. This was not just an object. I call it a plasma being, a light being, because it did control my mind. Interesting. Approximately 2 to 3 feet in width and 1.5 to 2 feet in height. Cylindrical in shape, but it didn't have any external outer edges because it was pure energy plasma, multicolored, translucent, and when I looked at it, I did not have any peripheral vision. Just straight ahead at that object. I could not see to my right or to my left or up and down. I was just focused only on that object. What I did was quite irrational. I stared at it. I waved my hand at it. And when I said, BS, then I turned around and walked upstairs and went to my bed, folded my hands on my belly, and looked straight up at the ceiling. So for 15 minutes, I was in this hypnotic state with nothing entering my brain or consciousness. After 15 minutes, it was as if the hypnotist said, okay, kid, wake up. We're finished with your wife and your pet. And all of a sudden, I woke up and said, oh my God, what in the world just happened? Damn. So it basically switched his brain off, made him turn around and go up to bed and just sit there until the experience was over. I ran downstairs and there was my wife jumping up and down saying, hallelujah, hallelujah. The angels have cured her. The angels cured her. She was running around the living room dancing, and the dog was running up and down with the energy of a little puppy. Right there, my whole worldview totally shattered. That was the first event. That's beautiful. Here are the figures. Is what Ray saw. See, it's like more smoky. That's not. This isn't a picture. This is a rendition. Just FYI, this is not a picture. It's just a rendition. It's not a picture of the actual object. This is what they saw. This is what they said. They allegedly saw. That's Ray right there. Ray saw kind of a column of smoke, column of plasma more. And if you see Dulce, his wife, looks like more of a Jello mold or like a glowing jellyfish. You could see the right there, right? It's not a real picture. Dulce said that she had not seen what Ray reported seeing. He insisted that he had been asleep for 45 minutes after he left the living room. He pointed at the clock to demonstrate that 45 minutes had indeed elapsed. Dulce insisted that she never left the living room and that Ray had never gone back upstairs. According to her, she had walked downstairs with Ray behind, looked down, saw Nina running around, and then started to celebrate. Then she saw Ray. The recollections of the event were completely different. Later, Ray would incorporate the idea that missing time, quote unquote missing time, must have been a factor in the event, and that the non-human beings had taken his wife and dog, healed them, and then returned them. That's what happens. Just like with the fire in the sky guy. He was actually taken, healed, and returned. Not like whatever the fuck the scary movie will tell you. My wife does not want to speak much about the incident and acts like nothing of consequence happened to her. This entity was merely an angel that had answered her prayers. Maybe she is correct. Our living room corner wall is on the northwestern corner of our house. At 6 a.m., that corner is dark because light does not enter that corner. We have closed drapes on the western window as well, and that part was dark because the sun was just rising on the southeastern side. We also have a wall dividing the windows from the sun rising to the east from the western corner. We know what we saw was not an optical illusion, describing how it's a very dark room, right? This event shattered Ray's view of reality at the time, and he said he was a pure rationalist. I went to a Catholic mass, but just to comfort my wife. I had never read any UFOs, ancient alien, paranormal, or quote-unquote New Age books. I believed all the New Age metaphysics literature was bullshit from the ex-hippies, even though I considered myself an ex-hippie while living in Berkeley, California from 1981 to 1988 while attending a PhD program in city and regional planning. I was a total skeptic. I was a pure rationalist. And any quote-unquote metaphysics or UFO-related themes was pure BS. On that day, my worldview came crashing down. Well, that's what will happen to a worldview. After this experience, Ray did what most experiencers do. He sought out materials to help him understand what had happened to him. He had never had any type of paranormal experience and certainly never encountered an energy plasma being. He wasn't Catholic like his wife, so he wasn't sure if it was an angel, although he wasn't ruling out that possibility either. He thought that he could find answers in the UFO and paranormal literature. Perhaps what they had encountered was some type of non-human intelligence. He looked for answers on the internet and ordered quote-unquote tons of books about the topic. His intensive book encounter was interrupted, however, by more strange and anomalous events. The healing reminds me of another healing entity that I've heard about, that who I love because of his name, who apparently allegedly inhabits this lady. His name is Dr. Peebles. And Dr. Peebles comes to her and heals people. And one night she was in her living room and her husband was like terminally ill, doing the same thing that our girl here was doing, praying for her dog. Well, she was praying for her husband. And this entity of light enters the living room and introduces itself as Dr. Peebles, enters her husband, then enters her husband, cured, and then she starts using Dr. Peebles to help heal other people. Wild. I forget what that was on. The next event occurred in May 2012, when Dulce reportedly saw a huge blimp-sized UFO outside of their house with stained glass windows just like our church all around the craft. When Dulce later visited Mexico, she claimed to have had a series of additional UFO sightings, some with her family, and saw 3 8-foot-tall human-looking beings dressed as white monks floating in front of her, 8 foot tall, like the Las Vegas encounter. Ray had his own sightings. The next event provided Ray with more information about the phenomena and further changed his life and its direction. It was also witnessed by his daughter, he said, and 3 of his friends. By this time, his wife was having regular sightings of giant UFOs. For her, these were angels or evidence of sacred contacts. She did not tell Ray about these encounters at the time because she was becoming concerned about his increasingly obsessive interest in UFOs and literature about them. On August 25th, 2012, a few months after the appearance of the plasma energy being, a friend of the family came by for help with some traffic tickets. Ray decided to wait for him outside. It was around 9:30 p.m. The sky was dark and cloudy and completely devoid of stars. Ray had been learning about UFOs and knew that some people attempt to, quote-unquote, call them down, like the infamous man on the Vegas news, the local guy. We'll play it now.
Everyone's going to think you're absolutely nuts.
Well, I thought I was absolutely nuts.
Until he says he saw UFOs. Over the years, 1,500 of them. Can we make it 1,501 today? What do you think?
I'll try it.
When the prophet started praying for a sighting, I wasn't exactly convinced.
I pray, oh Yahweh, that you send a sighting so that they know that I am not mentally ill. I am not a false prophet, like those who seek to kill me say I am.
I see something straight up.
Oh, brother, look at it. There it is.
You can barely see it, a white speck. Then another sighting.
There it is. I got it.
Photojournalist Jonathan Hawkins locks in on it. Let's take a closer look here. It's an orange sphere that appeared out of nowhere. I call the boss with an unexpected change in my story. I can see it clear as day. In fact, it's bright.
I can't believe this.
It's moving pretty fast.
It's going to Nellis Air Force Base. It wants to be seen.
We called Nellis to see what these things might be. Guess what? They didn't call us back. But this thing started coming back toward us. It's coming toward us now, I think.
What?
See, it's coming up toward us.
Whoa, man! Oh, hallelujah!
Then, a few seconds later, it disappeared.
It's going back up in space.
Prophet Yahweh isn't concerned. He says it'll be back. And I'm still not quite sure what those things were. Now, if I didn't see this for myself, I probably would have just laughed this whole thing off.
Ray describes the object as huge, approximately 2 to 3 city blocks in length. It was hovering about 5 feet above his neighbor's house. He saw hundreds of swirling white lights all around it. Then he heard the voice of his daughter. Even though she was not present, the voice said, "Daddy, next time you see a UFO, please let me know." You and Mommy have seen a UFO and I want to see one too. After this, Ray called for his daughter who was in the house. His daughter, who had just turned 10 years old, ran out to see the object and stared at it in amazement. Ray and his daughter gazed at the object for about 15 minutes, he said, and then his friend drove up with his wife and 17-year-old daughter. These people are conservative Catholics and college educated. Like Ray's wife, they attend Sunday Mass and are involved with many different ministries. They weren't interested in anything that had to do with the paranormal or with UFOs. When they arrived on the scene, Ray says they were flabbergasted. "What is that?" his friend asked, alarmed. According to Ray, they asked repeatedly, "Please tell us what it is." Finally, Ray spoke to them in Spanish. "You know perfectly well what it is." His friends spent a few minutes discussing what it could be. They thought perhaps it could be a strange atmospheric conditions, lights from the cars on the street, or lightning. Ray was not going to tell them that he called down, quote unquote, this craft. He knew his limits, apparently. Yeah, you gotta be... People aren't ready for the weird, can't tell them. As the speculations of his friends became more elaborate, he decided to try to communicate with the beings mentally. He told them, "You better come up with something better than this because they don't believe you." Instantaneously, he said, the light patterns on the craft changed. They are aware. When you are aware, they are aware. The craft bursts into a spectacular display of hundreds of stars, 10 times the size of Venus, that flickered on. And like Carl Jung's friend who reported witnessing, with many others, a UFO in South America and never thought to take a picture of it, the same thing happened with Ray. He comments on this incomprehensible aspect of the experience. After about 15 minutes of watching this light show of stars bursting all over the place inside the craft, my friends said they had things to take care of and they drove off. Looking back at it, I did not even question them leaving. Here they were in the middle of an event of a lifetime, and in the middle of it, they decided to leave. And I did not even question this. This was not rational. Just like when he was in the living room with the being that was healing their dog, he was told to just leave, and he did. Just like these people. They're seeing the UFO in this light show. They're like, "Oh, you know, we got to go take care of some." It was the odd reactions of the other experiencers that most struck Ray as unbelievable. During our UFO contact encounter, I was fully cognizant and awake for almost everything, except the realization that we were actually looking at and interacting with a UFO craft and its beings. We all had cell phones, and yet no one even bothered to take a picture, especially the teenager who always has a cell phone glued to her hands. I also did not notify my neighbor to inform them that it was above their house. They were aware of us looking at them because they had turned the light on in their living room and they saw us staring at their house. I also did not run inside to get my video camera or tell my wife. After my daughter told me that there were no mosquitoes outside, I quote unquote woke up and realized that we were under some sort of mind control. I could not understand why I had walked away from a scenario that should have been the front page story of Time magazine in every media outlet around the world if I had captured it on video. I quickly got my camera and camcorder and ran outside with both, but the huge UFO craft was gone. Here again is the problem Jung noted long ago. Some UFOs are not photogenic. Determined not to let such an event go unrecorded again, Ray took the route taken by Allison Cruz. He purchased a high-end photographic equipment so he could prove what he had seen. That's right, go out there with a will and a way, you'll find it. This is much like the intrepid reporter, the lady who lived outside Lake Worth, Texas, and she was being terrorized by this beast. So she decided to take her camera out and go find it. Lo and behold, she did. She took a picture of it. Proof of the Lake Worth monster. Now, most will say this is just a blurry whatever. You can't even tell what it is, but hey, you don't know that. I had purchased a large telescope, a night vision CCTV camera with adapters to attach this camera to the telescope, and an old used Sony camcorder with the old night vision technology, with a high-powered zoom for night shots. I said to myself, the next time my wife or I see these objects, we will be prepared to capture them on video and on camera, so no one will doubt us. We know what we saw, and they were real. Next time, we're going to prove it. None of this helped one bit. The phenomena resisted being photographed by Ray, yet it made a lasting impression on him. He has turned inward to assess what it means to be a human who lives within an immense universe and who has a relationship with something like God. The day after his close contact experience with the huge UFO craft, Ray saw a YouTube video on near-death experiences that discussed the quantum physics of consciousness. He immediately stopped searching the internet and purchasing books about UFOs. Instead, he began to order books on near-death experiences. Yes, those are wild. And consciousness studies. Over the next 4 months, he devoured more than 200 such books, sometimes reading for 18 hours per day. He was obsessed. He neglected his job and his family and did not go outside or watch television or use the internet. Instead, until December 2012, he spent all of his time reading. Dulce became concerned. She doesn't use the internet. She is not interested in UFOs or NDEs or consciousness literature, and she rarely discusses her experiences except to say that they are her angels. She was concerned by the obsessive nature of Ray's interest. Amen. Dulce, yes, that's how you just accept it, baby. You're not gonna figure out what it is or why it is in them books. Just is. Then he experienced yet another unusual event. It came in the form of an out-of-body experience that combined visual information and a direct message. After the experience, Ray believed that he had been given a special project, a mission. The mission was to present to humanity the relationship between the non-human intelligences that were interacting with him, the spirit world, and the physics of consciousness. After these events, Ray believes that he was given a mandate by the beings who had been interacting with him. As he was driving through rush hour traffic one morning, he had an experience that he describes as a download experience or an extraterrestrial telegram. He said that he felt like he was inside a large spinning wheel with many spokes. Each of the spokes represented a particular anomalous experience, such as an NDE, a UFO contact, or an out-of-body experience. He later called these contact modalities. As he explained, each of them was a way that non-human intelligence interacts with humans. He described how he then received a telepathic message, not via a voice, but via information. You need to inform humanity on the relationship between us, the non-human intelligence, and the spirit world. The reality we transition to after our death and consciousness. The physical structure of our cosmology. You will need help. There are 2 criteria for this help. This is not about making money, and there has to be minimal ego. After this, he experienced another series of powerful synchronicities. He relates that after his first experience, he had sent emails to 10 well-known researchers in the field, one who was Mary Rodwell. Mary is a researcher who claims to have supported over 300,000 experiencers, and she has written a number of books about her work. Mary didn't respond to Ray's email until after his rush hour experience. To Ray, this was a very meaningful communication that occurred directly after he was charged with the mission to found an organization. Mary introduced Ray to Dr. Rudy Shield, who was interested in UFO contactees, consciousness studies, and quantum physics. Rudy is an emeritus professor of astrophysics at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics and a retired tenured professor of astrophysics at Harvard University, as well as the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Cosmology. A serious-ass motherfucker. Ray was impressed by that. Rudy was interested in his experience and gladly recounted them in a phone call. I informed him of my quote-unquote adventures, including the OBE event that had occurred the day before, where I was given information about consciousness and the contact modalities. He was fascinated. He informed me that in fact the information I received on what I now call the quote-unquote contact modalities can all be explained through the quantum hologram theory of physics. It's auch been tough. A theory developed by the late Apollo astronaut Dr. Edgar Mitchell. Ooh, okay, so we got to look into Edgar Mitchell too. I love that. Ray phoned Edgar and found that they lived very close to one another, so they decided to meet. The meeting proved to be very important for Ray and influenced the creation of the organization that would become Free. When I arrived at Dr. Mitchell's house, we exchanged stories. He told me about this quote-unquote awakening in space and his early years growing up in Roswell, New Mexico. What? The site of the world-famous Roswell UFO crash. He told me that he worked at a local airport when he was a young teen, and he was paid via flying lessons. Edgar's parents owned 2 farm supply stores in the Roswell area, and he knew most of the ranchers and workers in the area because they were always at his parents' stores. He told me that after he came back from the moon, he was not only a national hero, but a hero to the folks in Roswell. Awesome. When he returned to Roswell, many of the old-timers and their children began to pull him aside and told him very intimate stories of the ship that crashed in Roswell. Edgar informed me that based on the information he was given by very reliable individuals he had known most of his life, that the Roswell crash was real. He then told me about his work as a test pilot for the Navy. He also told me that many of these test pilots were admitted into the NASA program as astronauts. He even told me of some of the quote-unquote experiences of the astronauts, including Russian cosmonauts, in space that were similar to his, involving a series of paranormal experiences. His stories went on and on for hours. Oh, that would be fun. Just a little, he's probably getting a little wilder too, because when you're personal with someone, at least from what's reported, you get a little more interesting parts of the story. Oh, yes. Okay, so now we're going to get into a little history, I believe, of Edgar Mitchell. This section's called Esoteric Cosmonaut. Sick ass moniker. Esoteric Cosmonaut. Esoteric Cosmonaut. Edgar Mitchell, the fringe of the future. Through his associations with Rudy and Edgar, Ray forged headlong into the study of quantum physics. Within my growing research circles, which included invisibles and visibles, when she says invisible, she was referring to Dr. Hynek's Invisible College, the scientists who study UFOs and the phenomena in the dark, in order to evade ridicule and not losing their jobs. Such as my academic colleagues in the field of quantum physics was the go-to explanatory framework for impossible skills like remote viewing, information downloads, and the strange physical aspects of UFO events, such as their ability to appear and disappear. Even my atheist colleagues entertained quantum theories as possible explanations for the extraordinary abilities that certain saints were reported to have possessed. I was mostly a bystander in the discussions of quantum theory and mechanics, but I was intrigued that so many of the scientist believers used this relatively new branch of physics to explain the phenomena. This included Edgar, one of 6 humans who have walked on the moon on the Apollo 14 lunar landing mission. Edgar earned a PhD in aeronautics and astronautics from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. He was also the founder of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, IONS, which is dedicated to the study of consciousness, and Quantrek, an institute populated by physicists and scientists who study energy and consciousness. He founded these institutions after a remarkable transcendent experience he had while on his way home from the moon, floating in space and looking at Earth. Sounds beautiful. The biggest joy was on the way home. In my cockpit window, every 2 minutes I saw Earth, the moon, the sun, and the whole 360-degree panorama of the heavens. And that was a powerful, overwhelming experience. And suddenly, I realized that the molecules of my body, and the molecules of the spacecraft, and the molecules in the body of my partners were prototyped, manufactured in some ancient generation of stars. And that was an overwhelming sense of oneness and connectedness. It wasn't them and us. It was, that's me. It's all of it. It's one thing. And it was accompanied by a sense of, oh my God, wow, yes, an insight, an epiphany. This experience was so profound that it changed the direction of his life. Upon his return to Earth, he went on an extended book encounter, voraciously reading as much as he could on the topic of consciousness. Edgar had been raised as a Southern Baptist, and he was a trained scientist, yet he finally found reports of similar experiences within the literature of Hinduism. The experience in space was so powerful that when I got back to Earth, I started digging into various literatures to try and understand what had happened. I found nothing in science literature, but eventually discovered it in the Sanskrit of ancient India. The descriptions of samadhi, Savikapla Samadhi, were exactly what I felt. It is described as seeing things in their separateness, but experiencing them viscerally as a unity, as oneness, accompanied by ecstasy. The transition back to Earth was difficult for Edgar, a feeling that Tyler had expressed as well after each of his launches of satellites and shuttles into space. Tyler said, "It's an intense experience to launch such a big thing into space. The whole crew, the astronauts, the engineers, those mission control, have to be working together as one unit. Nothing, and I mean nothing, can go wrong. Then it's such a high when the launch succeeds. Afterwards, we celebrate. But then, how does a person go back to their normal life? How do we just go to the gym? It's surreal in a way that is complete and a total letdown. I would call it a form of grief." I met Edgar on 2 occasions. I knew that he believed in UFOs and extraterrestrials, so I asked him to meet the small group of researchers that I have organized in California. He would attend our session via Skype. Beforehand, I found out everything I could about him and was surprised to learn that just like other brilliant scientists I have interviewed, he had been involved in the Stanford Research Institute. Oh, the homies! All of our favorites were at the Stanford Research Institute. Puthoff, Targ, Valet, Mitchell? That must have been a party. He was also a practitioner of remote viewing. What was more surprising to me was that he had conducted remote viewing experiments in space during the Apollo lunar mission. These experiments were not sanctioned by NASA, of course not, and Edgar said that they were quote-unquote secret. Edgar Mitchell, like Tyler D., was part of the hidden and unofficial history of the American space program that I had been discovering. The cosmonauts and the rocket scientists like Jack Parsons, who believed in extraterrestrial or non-human beings that interacted with humans with the goal of helping them achieve space travel. And in Edgar's case, peace on Earth. He believes this is a prerequisite for deep space travel. In a sense, there was a hidden history of esoteric cosmonauts. Edgar certainly fit the bill. Edgar believed that extraterrestrials or non-human intelligences intervened in space launches. Before our Skype session, I asked each of the other conference attendees to frame a question to ask Edgar. So none of the scientists she invited asked the UFO guy about UFOs. When my turn came, I thanked him for being a part of our session and asked the question, "Edgar, I know that you believe in extraterrestrials, and I also know that you believe that they've been interfering with our satellites and some of the rockets we launch into space. Can you describe how you came to this knowledge, and if you might know why they would be doing this?" Wow, that's a beautiful question right there. Because of his connections, Edgar said, he was privileged to know that extraterrestrials had dismantled several weapons that the United States have launched into space. He said that they did this because our weapons, particularly nuclear weapons, not only damaged humans and our environment, but also somehow damaged their environment. He said that there were different species of aliens and that there were good ones and bad ones. The ones who intervened in our space explorations were the good ones. I asked him to elaborate, if he would, on the nature of the good and bad extraterrestrials. He appeared happy that I asked his questions. I know, it's like, guys, these are the questions we want to hear the answer to. He explained that there are some people on Earth who are in contact with the good extraterrestrials and that they have missions to accomplish, sometimes in secret. He believed, like Tyler and James, that some extraterrestrials had left advanced technologies and certain scientists can unlock and use for the good of humans and the world. He said that we have already benefited from this technology. At the end of the interview, which lasted about an hour and a half, I came away with several observations. Edgar used language that I had heard used by many of the invisibles. Certain words and phrases were repeated often enough to form somewhat of a lexicon or a language group. It reminded me of academics who communicate in their own discipline's jargon, and unfortunately other people cannot understand what they are talking about. I wasn't sure what this meant, other than that there were a group of people who shared a common set of phrases and words, and who also shared similar beliefs about extraterrestrials, the US space program, and technology. Also, Edgar believed that networks of human extraterrestrial contact already exist. Organizations like SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, were not the preferred contact centers. Apparently, Tyler had mentioned this too. He thought humans with their DNA and cellular receptors that worked like mini satellites were the best receivers of contact information from non-human intelligences. And with everything we've read up to this point, that just is gelling. It's making perfect sense that the contact would come from not a material thing, when people have contact with the phenomena, UFOs, space aliens, extraterrestrials, monsters, whatever you want to call it, they communicate with them telepathically. They don't communicate with them with like a little radio device. So why would we be able to communicate with them with radio frequencies? They're not doing that. They're on the other level. They're beyond material ways of communicating.
You know, this is.
You know what? We need a refill.
A damn fine.
As we round the bases here in this chapter, and look, we're rounding the bases in this book. What a journey it's been, huh? According to several of the scientists' believers, including Edgar, quantum physics provides a framework for understanding the paranormal and supernatural events and abilities, including remote viewing, miracles, and contact with non-human intelligence. Ray and Edgar each called this the contact modalities. Edgar's theories are elaborated in several of his books. We got to get more of his books, man. That's what's up. And in his idea, the quantum hologram theory of physics and consciousness. According to this theory, Edgar says, information consists of patterns of energy. Information, energy packets are given off by matter. On some level, all bodies of matter contain information. Edgar and his associate, Rudy Shield, helped Ray understand this theory, and Ray published articles arguing that it provides a framework for his contact with non-human intelligences. Significantly, he also argued that it retires the conundrum of the subjective versus materialist approaches that has plagued research of UFO events. I now approach the so-called ET contact phenomena from a non-traditional perspective, one that embraces both spiritual/psychic and paranormal aspects, as well as decisively physical manifestations. Yes, let's all come under the umbrella of paranormal fun. His words again. Although non-local effects have been observed and studied for over a century by parapsychologists, non-local effects being telekinesis, remote viewing, in the absence of compelling theory, the results have been ignored or disparaged and certainly misinterpreted by mainstream science. Non-locality in quantum physics now provides a physical basis for the effects. A large number of investigators for several decades have demonstrated that brain waves can be synchronized and information transferred between individuals across Faraday cage barriers. The results do not obey the inverse square rule of electromagnetic propagation, nor are they time dependent, suggesting the phenomenon is on a macro scale, a version of quantum non-locality, but with a more degrees of freedom than simple particles undergoing a double slit experiment. Basically talking here about spooky movement. You affect one atom, it affects its partner or something that it's been in contact with thousands of miles away simultaneously at the very same time. So he's saying there's something here in what we talked about even with the physicist who was theorizing about bilocation. All these unique paranormal events can actually be described through quantum physics. Is basically what Edgar Mitchell's saying here. Edgar worked to establish several organizations devoted to the study of consciousness. He also helped fund and establish the Disclosure Movement, which is a movement initiated by citizens of various countries to force their governments to declassify documents related to UFOs. Through his connections to astronauts in the U.S. space program, he was able to motivate people who worked for these institutions to testify in front of Congress about UFOs. He is a pioneer who supported scientists who wanted to study consciousness and physics. This is now seen as a legitimate field of study, but when Edgar started out, it was not. He has joked that when he began his work on consciousness studies, he was called a quote-unquote space cadet by some of his colleagues, while others said he had been quote-unquote lost in space. I place Edgar within a lineage of esoteric cosmonauts and rocket scientists, such as Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, he was the Russian pioneer of astrophysics and a rocket scientist who also had a connection with, he called them angelic beings of light. And then Jack Parsons, who had a connection with dark beings of the darkness, he claimed, a group called the Thelma. He thought they were a demonic presence. And then Tyler D., who's talking to beings of light, he believes. And many others. People whose ideas and beliefs might appear to be on the fringe and are. They may be on the fringe of our future. Edgar had returned from space with the confidence of one who has been where only 12 humans have ever gone. Several months after my colleagues and I spoke with Edgar, he passed away. On the eve of the anniversary of his landing on the moon, whoa, talk about a bookend. All right, now back to Ray. We're going to round the bases with Ray here in our last couple pages. We're going to learn about another UFO experience he had. This experience he reported to MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. A great place to contact. I know I talked about them earlier. Not a scientist like place, like free, but still very legit. You contact them when you've had an experience. They send a couple certified folks out to listen to you. And it gets added to their collection of stories. When individuals with no prior experience of UFOs believe that they've had an extraordinary sighting of one, they look for information associated with UFOs to make sense of the event. One of the first things experiencers do after an anomalous sighting is to perform a Google search. They use keywords like shining object or UFO, and inevitably, the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, appears among the search results. MUFON is an organization with the goal of researching UFO-related events scientifically. The organization was founded in 1969 in the Midwestern United States and eventually expanded into a national network of units. It is a non-profit organization that trains quote-unquote field investigators. That is, people who go on site to study anomalous reports. The organization and its chapters also host conferences that focus on UFO studies and research. MUFON has been criticized for using quote-unquote pseudo-scientific methods for investigating sightings, reports, and experiencers, and it has been criticized by experiencers who have input their own reports into its extensive public database of UFO reports. I know the North Carolina State Director of MUFON and several field investigators. My associations with them have been friendly and professional. Their research methods on my observations are completely rational and objective, and err on the side of skepticism. However, individuals associated with MUFON are not necessarily representative. Experiencers I have interviewed say that their experiences with the larger organization have not gone well. Several have reported that their experiences have been made public in a completely altered form. Boo! When a person reports an experience to MUFON, it goes into a national database of reports, and these reports become property of MUFON. They can do what they want with them, like sell them to television program production companies. Oh, boo. I guess they need money, but the people who told you the story don't get any of that? One day, Ray received an email from a friend who said that he had seen Ray's family's experience portrayed on the television program Hangar 1, produced by the History Channel. Ray was horrified to find that an entire episode was based on his family's experience. What? But that the events as represented on the show didn't resemble their experience. Disturbingly, the message it conveyed was the opposite of his own family's experience. What we read about earlier. It's always altered. It's always altered by bigger media companies. Because we know, look, I mean, I don't know anything that's going on right now, okay? Don't know jack about fart. But we know when we read history that the CIA was heavily involved in the counterculture of the 60s and 70s, aka hippies, the art movement. We know that they worked with Jackson Pollock, and we know that they worked with Andy Warhol to help spread Americana throughout the world. So it makes perfect fucking sense that they'd now be working with, I mean, it's not the CIA directly. It's not like a CIA guy sitting in there. They have shell companies that are disguised, that are legit production companies, but the production companies have a slant, right? So you could barely even whiff that they're a part of anything. So that's how they did it in the 60s and 70s with the counterculture movement. There were nonprofits that were actually run by the CIA. This is history you could look up. So it makes sense that they would do this with like the History Channel. They'd release something that's the truth, but they'd alter it just enough so it's their truth. So when we watch it, our subconscious is like, oh no, that's the truth. That's what I should think about UFOs and aliens. Ray was horrified to find the entire episode. Oh, blah, blah, blah. Went there already. Disturbingly, the message it conveyed was the opposite of his own and his family's experience. What for them had been a positive encounter was morphed into a terrifying home invasion by extraterrestrials. That better not have been their dog encounter, because that was beautiful. Ray saw his own handwriting displayed on the screen. All the handwriting you saw in the videos, pictures, was my handwriting. It even had my attorney letterhead blacked out. That is why I know it was my report to MUFON. Ray was understandably upset that his experience, which had changed the direction of his life, and which his wife believed was angelic. Oh my God, it was the dog experience. So these fuckers turned the beautiful Nina experience into something terrifying. Believed was an angelic encounter, was portrayed as just the opposite. And again, just the opposite. Ah! Okay, so why I'm screaming is because my favorite thing is Warner von Braun. One of my favorite things. I love Warner von Braun, this scamp, Godfather, one of the godfathers of the rocket program, Nazi scientist who came over probably in Operation Paperclip when we got a bunch of former Nazi scientists and government dudes, and we said, hey, you know what? Why don't you work for us? You guys ran things pretty tight over there. Why don't you come work for us? So that's who he was. That's his past. Anywho, on his deathbed, he allegedly confessed to his cleaning lady or his caretaker that if there ever is an alien invasion, that it's going to be a fake alien invasion, a Phalian invasion. So this makes absolute perfect sense when we talk about the message being turned into something terrifying, like with Fire in the Sky. A healing moment being turned into something terrifying. With Ray, a healing moment being turned into something terrifying. They want us afraid. That seems to be a theme in a lot of stuff. You watch news if you partake. I don't. But if you partake, they want you scared, you know? So it's like, it makes sense. So that to me just adds credence to the Phalian invasion. One of my favorite things to think about. So if extraterrestrials show up and they're hostile, dollars to donuts, it's going to be the Phalian invasion. Because if there are bad extraterrestrials out there, I feel like they would have already invaded us, right? I don't know. The miraculous healing of the dog Nina was left out of the episode, as was the fact that Dulce had been praying all night for the healing of her dog. The title of the episode was UFO Home Invasion. Ray felt betrayed by the larger organization, but he was generous in stating that the volunteers and field workers associated with MUFON were not at fault. Many of my dear friends are members of MUFON, and all are very nice individuals, and I deeply respect them. Yeah, it's the organization at large. I love that, people. We got to really remember that. Individual folks are not to blame. It's the organizations at large. Just like when they try and make us feel bad that we're the reason, the environment shit or whatever, it's your individual problem. It's not. Okay? It's the big ass corporations and factories and bigger folks, richer folks, people in control that are polluting. We're just trying to live our fucking lives. We're just squirrels trying to get a nut, baby. All of them are volunteers. So the MUFON volunteers, they're beautiful folks. Because that's something I want to do just so I could get in the field and hear people's stories, you know? Then you get you have to pay. So it's oh God, I have to do a whole fucking class. So I'm a little wary about that, but it's one way in there. All of them are volunteers and doing very important and excellent work. Amen. My issue is not with MUFON volunteers, but with the MUFON Hangar 1 production. Somehow my field report was not translated to the video because not only were there inaccuracies, but there were actual fabrications. I just want to make it clear that the folks that I know that work for MUFON are good friends, highly credible, have done outstanding work, and I fully support them. MUFON is not the issue. The issue is my shock to find out that my story was sold to the fabrications of the MUFON Hangar 1 production. That my story was sold and the fabrications of the MUFON Hangar 1 production. Ray asks, why are there numerous fabrications? I understand it is Hollywood, but why total fabrication? At the time of that the episode aired, Ray had already begun to receive the first round of data compiled by his organization. His data set included over 3,000 reports from people who claimed to have UFO-related experiences. Overwhelmingly, these experiencers reported positive interactions with non-human intelligence. I have described the mechanisms of belief which present UFO events as real events that correspond with the truth. The use of a genre associated with truth The documentary, produced by a company ostensibly related to veridical historical accounts, in Ray's case, the History Channel, supports a central claim of this book. That what one sees on television, in the movies, and on the internet does not necessarily convey the actual stories of those who experience the events. Yet, the mechanisms provide a convincing viewing framework. As viewers are entertained by the productions, they are also forming opinions, biases, even memories that help them interpret and form meanings associated with UFOs. The truth is potentially quote-unquote out there, but it's unlikely to be found in media productions. The truth, as always, is found within. And that is the big lesson of today's chapter, it seems. You're not going to figure out the physical. The space aliens aren't going to come meet you. And you know, when they do meet you, they are actually. When they do meet you and you're a contactee, the stories we read, they don't outright tell you everything you want to know. Like with my favorite one we read recently with old Catherine, who was abducted. And she was always like, fuck you, tell me what's going on, damn it. And the space aliens were like, whoa, this would be a lot easier if you chilled. But sorry, lady, we can't tell you everything. That was chapter 6, a beautiful adventure. Was it really chapter 6? Yeah, that was chapter 6. A beautiful adventure into the unknown and the experience of Ray, his wife Dulce, and their family. A beautiful story of a healing of a dog and then encounters with more lights in the sky. Now it's time to say goodbye. That's the Sunrise Book Club.